Um, okay. Well, if you can believe it, many of you I'm sure can believe it, but it's this is our last session of the day. Well, excluding my closing remarks. This will be the last discussion of the day. And the title is Disability Justice 2025. And I'm going to explain how this session came about. You may remember from previous years that the final session of the day was always a synthesis session where we took a speaker from each of the previous discussions and had them come together and share their thoughts and through lines of the conference and create action items for our audience. But we felt that the political times that we are living in are so extraordinary and the stress levels are so high in our community that we were obligated to talk about what's going on the national level. And so we named this session Disability Justice 2025. We originally had three panelists, but unfortunately, two of them could not make it today. And so it's just going to be Claudia Center and me, and I'm going to interview her, and we're going to talk about what's going on right now. So, Claudia serves as the legal director at the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, also known as DREDF. She supervises DREDF's legal team and litigates cases that increase civil rights and civil liberties for persons with disabilities. She represents the disability community in legislative policy, amicus, and appellate work. Hi, Claudia. Good to see you.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
As a bit of context for the audience, can you briefly explain the history of DREDF and what you do?
Sure. So DREDF, Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, was founded more than 40 years ago, and it came out of the independent living movement. Those of you who have watched Crip Camp or The Power of 504 will have heard about the independent living movement, will have heard about Ed Roberts and Judy Heumann, and those pioneers started the first center for independent living in Berkeley, California. And so DREDF grew out of that first center for independent living to become a law and public policy civil rights organization for disabled people. And the reason it's called DREDF is at the time, all of the civil rights organizations were named like MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, or NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and so on. There are several of them. And so the idea was to have an organization for disabled people in that tradition of advocacy for civil rights.
Now, when I asked you earlier on the phone about how you're feeling about things under the new administration, you made a comment that perhaps things weren't exactly perfect even before the new
Yeah.
administration took over. So what was happening, in 2024 versus what is happening now? How is the situation evolving for people with disabilities?
So, the disability community has fought, for a long time to try to have strong laws in this country. We have something called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act. There are parts of the Affordable Care Act that are very important to disability rights. We have state laws. Um, but those laws don't really work for a lot of people with disabilities unless there are services and supports that exist in the material world, like the real concrete world. So, for example, in under Olmstead and regulations, we have the right to live in the community, not in institutions. But if the person doesn't have access to the supports they need to live in the community, that that right doesn't mean anything. So all of the services and supports that are federally funded are incredibly important. So that would include things like home and community-based services funds that are Medicaid dollars. That includes for students with IEP plans, dollars for the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Um, so so what's really frightening right now is that there are so many aspects of these supports that are, potentially or going to be slashed by this government. And that would directly impact the ability of disabled people, particularly people with significant or more severe disabilities, to live in the community, to have jobs, to access education, to access meaningful social activities, to be in families, and on and on and on. So that's one of many of the things we're very concerned about.
Yeah, I was thinking about those material supports, and for me, one of the an important material support is access to caregivers. And many of the caregivers that I've had over the years have been immigrants, and people the first language is not English do a disproportionate amount of caregiving work, and we already have a shortage. So Lord knows what we're going to do if they begin mass deportations of immigrants as they threatened to do.
Yes, this administration has um, stoked a lot of hatred and stereotype toward a number of groups that are, less privileged, like trans and non-binary people, immigrants, people of color, Black and Brown people, and like you say, there are a lot of caregivers from these communities, and there are also lots of disabled people, people with multiple identities. So these hateful attacks are really harmful to all of us, and including the disability community.
Let's break it down for the audience. Like, what does it mean specifically when you say you're going to slash Medicaid funding? How does that directly impact people with disabilities?
Well, from from what I understand, they want something like 800 billion, or I saw another thing that said 2 trillion to be cut from Medicaid, and those dollars fund almost every disability service in our society is funded by Medicaid. I mean, that is how disability services work in this country, for better or worse. They go through Medicaid for the most part.
Mhm.
Medicaid funds 70% of home and community based services. So, enormous slashes to Medicaid are going to be bad for the disability community. It's going to be bad for people who need a lot of support, like home and community based services, but it's also going to be bad for people with um, disabilities that have lower support needs, because it's, just an important program that serves millions of people. And, the public pressure to defend Medicaid has started to show some results. And so we just have to keep pushing to defend Medicaid.
And what do you think, I mean, will be the result to people with disabilities if the Social Security Administration loses a huge percentage of its workforce?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I mean, that's what I was that's an example of what I was talking about earlier, about sort of the infrastructure around our society. So, if somebody acquires a disability and needs to stop working, needs to access Social Security disability income insurance, they at this time, those applications are taking, 200, 300 days. I mean,
Mm.
that's a long time for people to live without, financial support. Um, and if you slash the staff, those wait times are just going to go up and up and up. And it can already take people, hours to get through on the phone, or they come to the office and it's hours of waiting for someone to help people. And the same is true for supplemental security income. Both of those programs are so important, and they need more staff, not less staff. So it's very troubling.
Yeah. Now, people with disabilities, when they experience discrimination, depending on whether or not they're an employee or if they're a student, there are agencies that they can report the discrimination to, who, under the law are supposed to investigate those claims. But what happens if nobody's home at the
Yeah.
at the OCR or the EEOC? What happens to those complaints? Do you know what's happening right now with those entities?
I mean, we know that the staff has been slashed. We know that people are not able to get through on the phone. We know, for example, or what I've heard is that all of the complaints that were pending in the San Francisco Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Education, that they all went to an office in Seattle, I think, like a completely different office, and that office had already had its staff slashed. So they were already lost staff and then suddenly had all the complaints from San Francisco.
Do you have friends in the government that work at these agencies? Like, do you know anybody personally? Have you talked to them about how this feels to them personally?
I do have friends in some of these agencies, and I think it's just very hard. It's very demoralizing. People, um, you know, serve in these jobs because they care about these systems and about responding to civil rights violations, whether it's in education, employment, or other aspects of society.
Last year, I was really excited. Two great things happened. One was um, the the posting of the final rule to Section 504, I believe in May 2024.
Yes.
And then also the naming of people with disabilities as a health disparities population. I felt like we had so much to celebrate last year. Can you tell us about the new Section 504 final rule and where it stands right now?
Sure. So the final rule implementing Section 504 for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services did come out in May 2024, and it's a really wonderful set of updated regulations to implement Section 504. There had been no major updates since 1977. So the rules, include the right to live in the community, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes we call that the Olmsted case. It includes the obligation to acquire accessible medical equipment, like diagnostic equipment. So if someone comes and you need to weigh a person and they're a wheelchair user, that you can do that. Or if someone needs to be examined, that there would be an examination table that allows for height adjustment and transfers and all the other kinds of accessible medical equipment. It requires that federally funded health programs be accessible on their websites or their kiosks. It says, now this one you might not have thought it had to say, but it says that medical treatment needs to be non-discriminatory, and that doctors, even though they have the right to medical judgment, they cannot base that judgment upon stereotypes about the worth of a disabled person or the quality of their life. So that is a really important one. That was actually cited in a brief that um, um, we recently submitted to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So these are just really strong regulations. They require effective communication with people who are deaf or blind or have intellectual disability, any disability. Communication has to be effective. So there's all kinds of very strong and important principles in the regulations.
So, with that in mind, can you tell us about the Texas versus Becerra, aka Texas versus Kennedy lawsuit?
Yes. So in Texas versus Kennedy now, 17 states sued the federal government in federal court, claiming that the new Section 504 regulations were unlawful because they had reasons, but that they're unlawful and that Section 50 and that they're not only unlawful, that they're unconstitutional. And in fact, Section 504 itself is unconstitutional under the spending clause, which is part of the US Constitution. And so they complain about all of the regulations, but they made two complaints in particular. One complaint was about a passage in the introduction to the regulations, and that is often called a preamble. It's
Mhm.
not technically part of the regulations, but it's a, sort of an explanation of the regulations. And it talked about how that there's a court in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that considered a claim brought by someone with gender dysphoria, a trans person with gender dysphoria. And that court found that gender dysphoria could be a disability under federal law. And so the passage in the regulation introduction, the preamble said, we reviewed, this is what that case says, and we agree with the analysis that depending on the facts, gender dysphoria may be a disability. And so the 17 states really protested that discussion in the preamble. So that was a long um, part of the,
17 red states
yeah,
attorneys generals.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And then the other part of the regs that they um, focused on was the right to live in the community under Olmstead, including there's a part of the regulation that talks about how it's not only that people who are now in institutions have a right to move into the community if they can receive services in the community, but it also talks about how you need to offer services to help or to support people who are at risk of being institutionalized. So they really didn't like that at risk of concept, which we think is very basic and important. So those are the two parts of the regulations that the 17 states focused on. But what we were really, I mean, both of those are terrible that they were doing. But then what was really even, well, it's hard to say what's more outrageous, but it was very outrageous that they were saying that Section 504 was unconstitutional.
I mean, this is extremely distressing. I found out about this for the first time when DREDF, along with a few other organizations, issued that statement um, about the lawsuit. And in talking to several people about it, they expressed that actually, if 504 were found to be unconstitutional, that potentially could jeopardize the ADA because of the way it integrates or interacts with 504. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Now, I do have some good news, which is that in response to all the pressure from the disability community, to, protesting calls to those 17 state attorneys general, um, earlier this month, they filed a joint status report. And in that status report, they said that they are abandoning their constitutional challenge. So that's really,
Good.
you know, a relief that we have some of that good news. Of course, the bad news is that they haven't dropped the case altogether. Another piece of bad news is that the Department of Health and Human Services issued a clarification in the Federal Register saying that that part of the preamble that I was talking about gender dysphoria, that they do not consider that to be, a law, something that they're going to follow. It can't be enforced. They don't agree with it anymore. So that's, we knew that was coming, based on everything that the administration has said so far, but that was also bad news. It does take it away from the court in Texas, so that's no longer an issue in the court in Texas because both sides are now in agreement.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Michael Hickson case. And can you tell our audience about that?
Sure. The Michael Hickson case got a lot of publicity during the early part of the pandemic. He's a Black man with significant disabilities, including paralysis. He was admitted to a hospital in Texas for treatment for COVID. Um, and there's, some obvious disputes about the facts, but the Michael Hickson's wife says that the doctors were very dismissive about treating Mr. Hickson aggressively for COVID and said things like his quality of life is very low. And, when the wife said, well, what about these other people who you're treating, aggressively? And the doctors said, oh, well, those other people, they had, a better quality of life. They were walking and talking, and, he wasn't, meaning, because he wasn't walking and talking before COVID, that his life was less valuable.
Mhm.
And ultimately, he died in the hospital. And there is a long history of ableism and also racial bias in the healthcare profession. There have been study after study after study of healthcare professionals, whether doctors, nurses, medical students, nursing students, that show biased attitudes based on disability and based on race. And so the disability community, as well as, including disabled people of color, are understandably concerned about whether people get appropriate treatment when they interact with healthcare providers or go to the hospital. And there's, evidence that health outcomes are worse based on race and based on disability for reasons unrelated to the disability.
Mhm.
So the estate of Michael Hickson brought this case under Section 504 and other laws, but the Section 504 claim said you withheld life-saving care from Mr. Hickson based on your stereotype that his life was not worth saving based on his pre-existing disabilities. And so a number of disability groups, including DREDF, and we had more than 20 other groups, filed an amicus brief. Well, so the court said, sorry, I didn't tell the end of the story. The trial court said, yep, you're let dismissed that claim and said, really this is about medical malpractice, whether, he got the right treatment as medical malpractice. That's not disability discrimination, that's medical malpractice. This is not, you can't bring a disability claim like this. And so that now that issue is up in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So 20 plus disability organizations joined a brief, an amicus brief in that court to say, look, there's this long problem with ableism in the medical profession, in healthcare. We have this history in the United States, going back of eugenics and sterilization, and that was led by medical professionals, led by doctors. Look at all these studies that show that this is a problem. 504 and all our other laws exist to try to combat that bias and to try to give people remedies when they are harmed by that bias. And so, there's still the case is going, and there'll be an date for oral argument. But that's what the case is about. And in that case, we cite to that 504 regulation that I was talking about that says that yes, you do have medical judgment as a provider, um, but that judgment shouldn't be based on stereotype or false beliefs about disability.
But this happened before the new rule was
Yeah, it did
published.
happen before the new rule. There are some cases out there that say something close to the same thing.
Mm,
But yeah, it may be that that'll come up, that the new rule didn't exist during then. But of course, we would hope you don't have to have a rule that
yeah.
says that. But yeah, that may come up in the course of the litigation. There was, it's interesting because this is a bipartisan issue, actually. So during the early time of COVID, during the first Trump administration, um, the head of the Office of Civil Rights for Health and Human Services was a person named Roger Severino, who really agreed that medical care during COVID could not be discriminatory on any basis. He listed all the bases, but he spent a lot of time on disability discrimination. And he put out a number of fact sheets and guidance documents about how you can't discriminate during COVID against disabled patients who need health care, even if there's a shortage. Now, you can during a shortage, you're allowed to triage and you're allowed to think about, okay, who's going to survive and who's probably not going to survive. But beyond that kind of triage, that is very short term. It's not like, are you going to survive for 10 years? It's not, are you
Mhm.
going to survive and go run a marathon? But just like short-term survival, that if you go beyond that, that's disability discrimination. So the Trump first administration and then the Biden administration all agreed with this concept of trying um, to have fair treatment of disabled people in how we administer healthcare.
Yeah, I personally derived great comfort from that statement issued by the OCR. I was quite worried about that. Um,
Yeah.
Lastly, before we get to the audience questions, can you also inform us about the Taylor Cardi case and what's going on there?
Sure. So, based on kind of everything that I've talked about like the studies and the lived experiences around um, barriers and bias in healthcare for disabled people, we think it's really important for there to be disabled healthcare professionals. Just like in law, it's really important to have disabled lawyers, disabled judges. So we think it's really important to have disabled doctors, disabled nurses, and so on. And unfortunately, in this country, we're kind of behind the ball on having disabled doctors. We do have some that are, very well known, and most of the doctors who have significant disabilities acquired their disabilities after they went to medical school. We do have some deaf doctors who've gone through medical school, but it's really, it's still the early days of trying to bring disabled people into medicine and nursing from my point of view. I mean, we have made a little progress. So from our point of view, it's very important for qualified people who want to become doctors or nurses have that chance. So we represent someone named Taylor Carty who has cerebral palsy and uses a wheelchair. She has a pretty good motor skills, like no impairment on one side, and then she has some motor impairment on her left side. She got really good MCAT scores, pre-med, did everything, applied to schools, had interviews, and was admitted to a medical school. And then she asked for some modifications to the technical standards as a reasonable accommodation under federal law. And they, to me, they weren't even that like dramatic. It was like um, either do CPR with somebody else, certain uh, blanking on the word. You can tell I'm not a medical profession. Certain IVs that she could do it if she could direct somebody, but a lot
Sure.
of things she could do. And so they said that they couldn't do that, that they wouldn't modify the technical standards, and her admission was revoked. And that was the only school she got into, even though she got interviews at some other ones. So her lifelong dream of becoming a doctor, of helping people actually with the same disability as hers, came to an end. She's now getting a master's in public health. I mean, she's very resilient, tends to be a quality that disabled people have, but what a loss. And so we filed an administrative complaint on her behalf. We want the medical school to change that policy, and the Department of Justice is investigating. But of course, all of the cuts, including to the Civil Rights Department, are very concerning. So we don't know what will happen.
What stage in the process is that case currently?
Still in the investigation stage. The Department of Justice is looking at it.
Okay. Um, all right, let's turn to the audience questions here. Is there an action plan that individuals can follow or a website slash infographic for more information, such as examples of public comments or emailing representatives?
Yes, you can look at DREDF's website, dredf.org, dredf.org. We have various action alerts on there, including about Medicaid. Some other leaders on Medicaid are the ARC, um, an organization called NHELP, the National Health Law program, and also AAPD, which is the American Association of People with Disabilities. And we all have action alerts on Medicaid. And, we are all talking about whether there will be a big disability action in DC in July for the 88th anniversary to defend, not only Medicaid, but education. Um, the protection and advocacy agencies. So, like in California, we have Disability Rights California. If you're in a different state, it might be Disability Rights Montana. But those all have federal funding, and that's all been zeroed out in some of the budget documents that have been leaked. Same for Centers for Independent Living. So, all kinds of sort of really foundational aspects of disabled life are under threat. So it could be that that's, where we're still talking about it, but that's where we all end up, is trying to activate on all these issues and then come together in July, either in DC or in a local version of the DC protest.
Louise Andrew says DOJ staff has been laterally transferred to do nothing positions, including one of the key leaders in the Office of Civil Rights.
Yes, that's correct. Rebecca Bond has been moved. She was the head of the Civil Rights Division. And some people, yeah, people have been moved to like um, complaint processing or FOIA responses, like the Freedom of Information Act. Like, yeah, do nothing jobs are kind of the right phrase compared to the important, leadership that they were doing.
Are you familiar with AB 408 in California?
Any more hints? I could Google it real
This is
quick.
the bill that's working its way through the state legislature that would bring physician health programs to California as like a physician diversion for quote unquote supposed to be for impaired physicians or physicians with substance use disorders, but is actually ensnaring people with disabilities and sucking them up into this system that's not really meant for them and violates many principles of the ADA.
Yes, now I remember, I've seen some emails on this, and I think we are gonna get involved in this. Yeah, I don't think that there should be any reason to bring people professionals with disabilities into a diversion program unless there was, I mean, I guess you would know more than me, but diversion programs are when somebody is impaired from working, right? Due to like a drug or alcohol issue, right?
Right. There are a million things wrong with this bill, and we're going to be having a webinar on it shortly. We have a team together that's putting together, or has put together already, you know, a statement from SMATI and DM3P that is urging the legislature to not take up the bill, and so we will be also publishing some information about that shortly.
Great. I know, Dred, if it's in the hopper for us to write a letter expressing the same principles as you're describing, and we'll wait to see your materials to make sure we have the wisdom of your analysis as the people who are directly impacted.
We have a comment. What is of great concern is the fact that people with disabilities who apply for SSDI get denied at a very high rate. At times, the determination is not based upon a sound assessment of the medical condition, and people at times wait several years for their claim to be considered.
That is true. That is completely true. People can wait years and have to go through an appeal and then a hearing before an administrative law judge before they are granted their benefit.
Yeah, one of our viewers said that they are 5 years into their claim at this point. So yeah, I think, and another person made the point that the process was set up in such a way to wait people out and force them to give up. It sounds like
Yeah,
my health insurance.
yeah. Um, I represent a person who has a schizophrenia diagnosis. He's currently incarcerated. He's approved for mental health diversion. So he can be released whenever there's a treatment bed in the community for him. He has to have a mental health treatment bed as a condition to be released. And the treatment beds are saying, well, we won't take you unless you have SSI. And then SSI is saying, well, we won't process your application until we know you have a release date. And even then, it might take 6 months. And then, so he's just stuck for no reason in prison. I mean, we're gonna hopefully fix it, but it's just awful.
I mean, thank you for the work that you're doing. Um, Nebraska still does not have an Olmstead plan and has an open DOJ case as a result. Unfortunately, the protection and advocacy systems federally mandated are being threatened.
Yes, that's the Disability Rights California or Disability Rights Nebraska. That funding for protection and advocacy agencies, there was a leaked HHS memo that has that, completely zeroed out. And so we have to fight back all these things at once.
I mean, they said this was going to be their strategy, right? To flood the zone.
I think so.
That's right.
Yeah.
To have so many things going on at once that we couldn't possibly keep track of all of them or
Mhm.
respond to all of them.
But there is, I mean, it is hard to do it all, and I think we're all struggling, but the public outcry can work. So I know we all heard about this autism registry that the administration was proposing. Um, it just sounded completely outrageous, and people really um, protested, and even autism organizations that are traditionally in conflict over a lot of public policies got together and said all of this is terrible, and now they have walked it back and say they're not doing it anymore, and so that was all just from the public outcry. So we know it can work, and we just have to keep doing it. We got 12 Republicans to sign a letter saying they don't want Medicaid to be slashed. We don't know. We may have different opinions about what's being slashed and what's okay, but that wouldn't happen without the pressure of the disability community on our elected officials.
Absolutely. Um, this administration has cut HHS programs such as CARES, LIHEAP, LIEBT, HUD, Section 8 housing. Is it possible that we can join the 20 plus disability organizations to strengthen support of our ADA disability justice?
I mean, I think we're all going to have to work together and to make our voices heard, call our elected officials, write the White House, on and on and on. In California, are two of the Republican representatives who signed on to that letter in support of Medicaid. And the organizers, including disability community, but also including healthcare workers, have really flooded, those elected officials to make sure they get postcards and letters. And there have been rallies. There have been um, town halls. Even if the representative doesn't come, they have a big town hall, and everyone talks about how they care about Medicaid. And so we kind of just have to keep doing that wherever we live. Try and figure out where the um, Republican is who might be open to saving these critical programs.
Yeah, I just want to stress, as many have stressed today, this importance of solidarity. And, two of the principles of disability justice, two of the 10, one is cross-movement solidarity, and the other is cross-disability organizing. And for cross-movement solidarity, I think that's really important that we stick together with all of our um, diverse the diverse and minoritized groups. I've heard people say that, part of why the Democrats lost was because, they were sticking their neck out on behalf of certain groups. And I just don't think that we should leave any group behind, that we are all so much weaker if we abandon even one of the small diverse groups that makes up the rich fabric of our country.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And if you look even, scratch the surface a little bit on, the the I keep saying hatred, but that's all I can think of. Hatred towards immigrants or trans and non-binary people, or black and brown people, or DEIA work. It's all intertwined. Like the ableism is going to be intertwined with the anti-trans bias is going to be intertwined with the racial bias. And so, yeah, it's all of a piece, and we do have to fight together.
Well, on that inspirational note, Claudia, I think we're at the end of our session. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you and your work and the work of your colleagues. Please keep us posted on how things are going, and don't hesitate to reach out to our community.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you all very much.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'm now going to introduce myself for the next session, which will be entitled Closing Remarks by Peter Poulos. Um, don't leave, everyone. We've got a little bit more excitement to come. I notice our YouTube numbers um, start to head downward very quickly around this time of day, but I promise I'll make it worth your while. Well, I can't promise that, but I'll try. Let me share my screen here. All right, everybody. Well, this is the end of the day. It is now 3:45-ish Pacific time, and I want to thank all of our presenters, panelists, speakers, and participants for spending the day with us. Um, I can't believe this is already the end of our sixth annual conference, and I have to say that I think this is one of the best ones we've ever held. I was just floored from start to finish by all the amazing presentations. I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors and funders, especially MSDCI, my department, the Stanford Department of Radiology, which is an extremely generous funder of SMATI, Chemical and Systems Biology, Office of the Chief Community Engagement Officer, Office of Faculty Development and Diversity, which is also an extremely generous funder of SMATI and has been from the start, the Department of Medicine, and then otolaryngology, head and neck surgery. And again, to recognize the NBME for awarding us a grant to help fund this conference. Want to thank, maybe many of you have seen perhaps this screenshot on our website at the registration page. And this is Hanesh. He is one of our radiology residents at Stanford, and he graciously agreed to be our handsome model on the registration page. So thanks, Hanesh, and thank you, Rick, again, and Positive Exposure for bringing joy to our community and for bringing the positive exposure photo shoot to life. And thanks as well to everyone who helped put on that event, including the Department of Pediatrics and their RISE team, and Devora Kantar-Kathari, and Jean Sullivan, and Ken Sutta. So this is SMATI. We stand for health equity for our patients and disability inclusion for providers. Remember to march with us, take part in mentorship, advocacy, research, community, health equity, and education initiatives. We definitely need more people to join our effort and put in work so that we can continue to advance in our goals. I showed this earlier in the talk as well, and it was on the slides during the break. But if you have the ability to donate, we would really appreciate your doing so. We had over 1,000 people attending our conference. If everyone just uh, donated $10, I'm not so good at math, but I think that's $10,000, and more than that would be welcome. I want to say thank you, especially to our commander, Katie Pontius, who is our event planner in chief, and she's just has been so amazing over the years. And once again, we couldn't have done this without you. Katie keeping us on track and and driving us forward. I'm also going to say thank you to Lewis, who has done just a phenomenal job the past 6 years and is going to be transferring off as the technical lead of the SMATI conference. Um, you've gone above and beyond for us, and we love and appreciate you. He'll still be on the board of directors of SMATI, I guess, until he tells me otherwise. Um, this is our some more of our team here. Devora Gathari, who does communications and strategy for SMATI. Amy Thomas, web and graphic design. Gene Sullivan is our admin, event planning guru. Sheila Sanchez is in charge of sign language and closed captioning and ensuring accessibility for everyone. Thank you, Sheila. Um, our technology and social media team, Lewis, Eric Lee, helps out with conference technology. Aparna Pillai on social media and accessibility, and Ioana Soliman for conference technology. I'd like to thank the planning committee. I thank myself, Katie, Devora, Ken, Lewis, and Dakeen. Of course, I'd like to say thank you to the board of directors of SMATI for their hard work and dedication in working on all of our various projects. We wouldn't be able to do any of this without you. Of course, Ken, my co-chair, love you. For those of you who are interested in being a mentor or being mentored, I will point you to our Disability and Medicine Mutual Mentorship Program. We have virtual monthly meetings. We have asynchronous mentorship opportunities online, and we're open to disabled healthcare workers, trainees, and allies. There's no cost. You can email us at info@disabilitymedmentors.org. And the website is disabilitymedmentors.org. I'd also like to introduce one of our new initiatives, the Stanford Medicine Disability Champions Program, where we're going to assemble disability champions teams within different departments at Stanford Medicine. And those representatives will take part in a champions council to develop educational materials and institutional strategies that they can bring back to their departments to educate their departments and improve policies and procedures within their departments, and then bring lessons back to the council. It'll be a bi-directional sort of wheel and spoke relationship, and we think that it's going to really expand our reach. Thank you to all of our 2025 speakers, and again to all of you in the audience for attending. Do you want to present next year? We'll be accepting RFPs for 2026 starting in the fall, and we'll be sending out an email detailing how to submit. And see you next year at the 7th annual conference in spring of 2026. And with that, I'm going to say thanks again to our funders and sponsors, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks.